Good morning. I am so delighted to be here with you virtually. I'm just grateful for being a part of your community and sharing the Dharma with you. It just touches my heart so deeply. So I'm going to go ahead and get started this morning. We'll say the Refuge Prayer 3 times. We will do some chanting. We'll sit in meditation, and then share a little bit of a Dharma talk that I've been working on, and then hopefully we'll have time for a little guided meditation at the end. So feel free to just sit back and relax and make this next hour your own. I'll begin by ringing the bell 3 times. And then for our chant, we're going to do Lama Chino, but let me say the Refuge Prayer. Feel free to say it with me 3 times. In Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha, we go for refuge until fully awakened through the practice of generosity, ethics, patience, enthusiastic effort, concentration, and wisdom. For the sake of all beings, may we realize and demonstrate our innate goodness. In Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha, we go for refuge until fully awakened through the practice of generosity, ethics, patience, enthusiastic effort, concentration, and wisdom. For the sake of all beings, may we realize and demonstrate our innate goodness. In Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha, we go for refuge until fully awakened through the practice of generosity, ethics, patience, enthusiastic effort, concentration, and wisdom. For the sake of all beings, may we realize and demonstrate our innate goodness. And so I think many of you know Lama Chino, certainly one of my favorite chants, and it translates as calling in the Lama, calling in the teacher. But it's really an opportunity for visualization that in this moment, wherever you are, just to imagine this ability that we all have to call in the Bodhisattvas and Buddhas of all time and all places, that in this moment they can bring to you all that knowledge, all that knowing, all that wisdom, and all the love and caring that exists in the universe. So as you chant together with me, just think of that. Think of that you're actually calling in all that wisdom and love and support. Lama Chano, 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 Lama Channo, Lama Channo, Lama Chechano, 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 Lama Channo, Lama Channo, Lama Chechano. I see that my beloved little Tails, the cat, she always loves it when I chant and meditate. For some reason, I don't know if your pets are like that, but she seems to be attracted to whatever's going on in this moment when I'm with you. So that's my cat, Tails. So with that, we'll have a little time for sitting in the silence, meditation, whatever practice you prefer. I'll give some light instructions, but feel free to make it your own. So as always, we first begin by ensuring that we're sitting in a comfortable position, maybe making sure that sort of letting go of any stress that you might be holding in your body. And we can begin by taking some slow, deep breaths, breathing in, counting to 4, and breathing out, counting to 6. This morning we'll do a Dzogchen style meditation, if you would like to join in. This, as you know, is done with your eyes open, ears open, throat open, nose open, everything just open to what is around you. We lean back a little bit and raise our gaze. Not staring at anything in particular, but really opening up your peripheral vision so you're softly gazing. If you're near a window and can gaze out into the sky, that would be an awesome way to do Dzogchen practice. We begin simply by arriving in this moment, in this presence, in the eternal now, just sitting, just breathing, just being. No place to go, nothing to do. Truly, deeply let it be enough to just sit, just breathe, and just be. Thoughts and feelings will inevitably arise. And in this style of meditation, or non-meditation, as it's actually called in Tibetan, gome, you might be aware of a thought or feeling. You just allow it to arise and fall away of its own accord. We get an opportunity in this moment to practice just being, opportunity to become more aware of all the stuff that we add to each moment. Thoughts, stories, emotions that can drive us off in different directions. But now we're just practicing staying, being. Aware of whatever arises moment by moment. So this morning I'm excited to talk about something that I have been exploring over the last few months. And it's sort of a expansion of the teaching on the five aggregates, the five skandhas: form, sensations, perceptions, mental activity or formations, and consciousness. So we've talked about that before, but this morning I want to look at some expansions of this way of knowing. When you think about how you go through your life, deeply understanding how you know what you think you know is an opportunity for us to more deeply understand how this commitment to a certain way of knowing informs our thoughts, our emotions, and our behavior. And so I hope you'll take this opportunity to just experience with me, explore and reflect on your own life, how these different ways of knowing influence you. So I think about this in the way that that first moment of in the morning, allegedly, that in the Pali Canon, where it talks about the Buddha has awakened under the Bodhi tree. And it was said that the first thing he did was to touch the earth and say, the earth is my witness, or I know what is real, or many other interpretations. But I wanted to talk about two interpretations of the Pali in that particular part of the canon. Robert Thurman, is a scholar, a Buddhist scholar, a Tibetan Buddhist, very learned. And he describes this moment as, it's not like entering a new state. It's uncovering or surrendering to the reality that has always been there. Buddha realized he'd always been in nirvana, that nirvana was always the case. Your reality itself is nirvana. It's the unreality, your ignorance, that makes you think you're this self-centered, separate being trying to fight off the overwhelming universe and failing. Robert Thurman says in that moment, Buddha recognized he is the universe. So we ponder today, I am the universe. The universe is me. My teacher Lama Surya Das would say, we struggle often with this little idea of the ego, but the Buddhist teachings are encouraging us, inspiring us to think about the ego as the entire universe and how we would operate in the world if that was our way of being. There's a poet, W.S. Merwin, who also says, the Buddha reaches down and with his finger touches the earth. He says, the earth is my witness. He said, Mara, you are not the earth. The earth is right here beneath my finger. And the earth is what we're talking about. So that particular quote seems to really emphasize that there's many different ways of knowing, and most of us, most of the time, are working with Mara. We're working with that confusion, that illusion, that overlay of complicated and ways of knowing that is infused with actual non-reality. And so I think that's why this is such a powerful teaching, this very first moment, because I would say this is the essence of the Buddhist teachings in all, that what he said in that moment is there is a way of knowing beyond the skandhas, and it is the skandhas that are causing us to think we know something that is that which is not true. So that's why I think it's helpful to go through, how do I know what I know? How do I think I know what I know? A friend of mine who's an HR manager told me a story recently about a woman that came in and was complaining about a coworker, that she was purposefully being unhelpful. And my friend John got the two women together, was trying to work it out between them. And he asked this woman, well, could you put yourself in the other woman's shoes to see, it from her perspective, whether or not you think you know that she's purposely being unhelpful, but what if you were thinking about the situation from her point of view? And the woman said, I just know. I know because I know, and I don't need to do that. And so I laughed at that story because it's kind of true that most of the time we go through life just thinking we know what we know, and since we know it, it must be true. So that's the reason why this practice of breaking down the ways of knowing, I think, can be very helpful. So I hope this will be very experiential. I'm going to talk about, I think, 7 ways of knowing, not covering all of them certainly, but some interesting ones that we can ponder and just consider about how this fits in your own life. So the first one I want to talk about is emotion. There's some scientific research that says the majority of our ways of knowing is emotional, that we see the world through the color of our emotions. When we are joyful, um, we see more joy in the world. And when we are sad, we see more sadness. And so what's interesting about emotion is that um, an event happens, whatever that event might be. And two people witnessing and experiencing that event from an emotional perspective might have a very different experience. And so when we think about knowing through our emotions, we can just sort of like tease apart, go a little bit down below. And when I'm having an emotional response to something, being able to explore, where is that emotion coming from? I had an opportunity, I was taking a course, a little workshop from another Buddhist friend of mine here. It's talked about inner ways of deciding. And one of the things that she pointed out that I hadn't heard before is that psychologists will say that the more extreme your emotional response to a particular situation, the longer whatever is beneath that emotion has been in your life. So it immediately brought to mind to me that most of you know I'm kind of a chilled out person, but there are times when something just builds up inside of me, and this COVID time has sort of exacerbated that. And I have had times where I've just irrationally responded to Erica and in a mean way. What's not me? And she and I've talked about it a lot. And I really got to understand that that particular weird emotion response that I have sometimes is very deep rooted in my family way of dealing with conflict, which is don't deal with conflict. Tamp it down, keep it buried. And my mother, who such a loving person, but so stressed out, working a 40-hour-a-week job, 3 kids, taking care of the house, her way of dealing with that was to try not to let it out until it came out in this screaming and severe response. And we as children couldn't understand why she was having this radical response to something that normally was, what we considered not a big deal. So I only offer that example is I think that we all have that sort of emotional response to ourselves and the world that warrants sort of looking underneath and seeing how that might not be serving us in this present moment. The second one I want to talk about that's fascinating to me is language as a way of knowing. And it's almost the water in which we swim. Language in its essence is just a series of symbols and signs that we have given a specific meaning to. It's so interesting to me that when I look at an English word, I pretty much know what it means. I think I know what it means. And it's describing something to me. It's a way of allowing me to know something about a particular situation. So as an example, here in South Africa, some of you know that there's 11 official languages. So there are many times here that I am struck with something, a word, a symbol, because not even using maybe the same alphabet that I look at and I just see symbols. It has no meaning for me. One example was just yesterday talking to one of our community members, and she said her husband was all mogy about the musical Hamilton. And I laughed and I said, oh, I'm mogy too about Hamilton. And it was funny for me because in that moment, a word that I wasn't familiar with, to go mogy, which is sort of, it's a word used in South Africa and Zimbabwe that says to go without restraint, to go wild, just to let yourself be encased and involved completely in something. So to go mogy is for me that example of when I saw mogy, I heard mogy, and out of context, it was just a symbol, it was just sounds. And yet then when I know, it conveys a way of knowing to me about the particular situation. So the language that we use is very powerful in describing to ourselves and to others what's happening in this moment. So it can be powerful to look at the language you're using in your own world, how it is serving you, and how some language does not serve us. So something to ponder. So language is number 2. Number 3 is memory. And memory is fascinating to me because we think we know what we know because we're remembering exactly what happened. But now from a scientific perspective, and maybe from a real life perspective, we know that our memory is tainted by what was happening in that particular moment. In stressful situations, our memory can be skewed. Eyewitness to events are often wrong. So, but memory, if it's unexamined, memory can be cannot serve us. And I often use the example of the woman and the dog, that the woman had been bitten by a dog as a child and her entire life had been terrified that her memory was telling her all dogs are to be feared. And my experience with dogs was all dogs are wonderful and going towards them instead of running away from them. But neither of those perspectives is 100% true, that really there's a way of knowing with an animal, if you're fully present, to know how to respond in that moment. And it's really having to override any memory that you might have. You might pull together some memories. You might have a way of knowing that might serve you in a pinch, but it's helpful to just kind of go beyond what is serving me in this moment. So that's number 3. Number 4 I want to talk about is faith. And in Buddhism, we often talk about faith as it's not blind faith. It's not just simply believing something because somebody told you, although certainly that is something that happens in Buddhism, where people forget that the Buddha said, don't believe me, you have to try it out for yourself. But there is a little component of faith that we talk about in Buddhism, of sort of a light faith, of the possibility that we want to try these practices out for ourselves because we have faith that it might make for a better life and for a better world. So it's helpful to look at how we hold faith in items, in people, in systems, and that some of that is maybe based on fact, and other of that might have been the cultural norms that told us that we should have faith in capitalism or democracy or whatever that might be. There's one thing I wanted to give a quote from the 16th Karmapa. It talks a little bit about how might we approach these teachings. And in the Tibetan Buddhism, devotion is the primary form of practice, that you're just devoting yourself fully and wholeheartedly to the teachings. But I would always say, with a little grain of salt. The 16th Karmapa says, if you 100% have dedication and confidence in the teachings, then if you do, live every moment, every situation, every time can be part of your spiritual practice. You will be living the practice instead of just doing it. So I think there is a role of faith in Buddhism, and that is a sort of a light touch, that we listen, we practice, and we have a little faith that if we are confident and dedicated, that it can make a positive difference in our own world and in the world around us. So that's number 4. Number 5 is one we practice all the time, which is imagination. I always say imagination is the most powerful muscle that we have. And if we exercise it, that it can transform the way we are experiencing the moment. And so imagination is a way of knowing. And some would say, oh, that's just magical thinking, or oh, that's just, having a little fun. But everything that we've done or made came from imagination. I'm talking to you on this laptop and looking at you through an application. And those two things came about from someone's imagination, that they imagined the possibility of these tools being created. And so I really honor imagination. I exercise my imagination so that it's not working against me, because sometimes our imagination can run wild with fearful situations. But instead, I'm harnessing my imagination to experiment with how I can show up differently. So that's number 5. Number 6 is a tricky one, because number 6 is intuition. And I have a dear friend who says she cultivates her intuition. And for her, intuition means aligning with that higher, deeper, innate way of knowing. But we also know that some people, when they think that their intuition is telling them something, that it's actually not intuition, but it's really a way of knowing through memory or applied association. I use the example of when Erica was a little kid and she would go to visit her dad and by flying on an airplane. And she did this for several years. She loved doing it. But then one time she had a stomach ache, and she suddenly got the thought in her mind that the stomach ache was telling her she shouldn't get on the plane. Now, that might sound dramatic for a little, 7-year-old girl, but we all do that. Sometimes we feel something, what we call a gut reaction. And it's often good to explore where's this gut reaction coming from? Is it being in alignment with that higher, deeper, innate way of knowing? Or is it a memory that's coming up within us? So those are the 6 things that I wanted to share with you: emotion, language, memory, faith, and imagination, and intuition. So I wanted to end by just talking about these ways of knowing kind of all happen in our consciousness, which is the 5th skandha. And what has challenged me for some time, I think, oh, well, isn't that like awakening in consciousness? But as I read more deeply into the teachings and do the practices, what I'm finding is that the teachers are telling us that consciousness is all this stuff that is limited to our own being, and that there is a deeper, expanded, higher, innate way of being aware. It is called pure awareness, or Rigpa in Tibetan. And what I love about this word Rigpa, the exact translation is knowledge of the ground. And so I love that it's really pointing to this way of knowing that is beyond the limitations of our own consciousness. And so the experience of it, as it's described in language, which has its limitations, is that there is an awareness of our own consciousness and our own experience. But if we can see that more clearly and then practice almost looking for, exploring, I would almost say falling into, when we see all the consciousness, the sensing, the perception, and all that happening, then just explore if there's something underneath that or beyond that. And what the teachings would describe is that pure awareness, which is beyond the limitations of your own consciousness, and would be described as the awareness of the universe, the awareness that everyone can tap into, that everyone is a part of, that it is this pure awareness beyond all what is happening in consciousness, and sort of encompassing that as well. But I liken that having this moment of pure awareness is that you see what's happening in consciousness, but you also see the water within. It is all swimming. So there's something else. Oh, I wanted to end, before we do a little quick guided meditation, I'm a big fan of Leonard Cohen when he was alive. He had such brilliant things to say. He's quoted as saying, if you don't become the ocean, you'll be seasick every day. If you don't become the ocean, you will be seasick every day. And I know I can certainly relate to that. So when we remember that there's a way of knowing that is beyond our consciousness, and we practice sinking into or aligning, or however you might experience that, there's a way of knowing that allows us to live a life of greater meaning, greater purpose, of being more in line with the universe. Or that's my perspective. So let us do just a little experiential way of practicing with a guided meditation. And I think this helps to close your eyes, because I really want you to use your power of imagination. And so I'm going to ask you to think back on these 6 ways of knowing, and think about in your own life how that particular way of knowing has informed some of the decisions that you've made in your life. You might think of some of those big decisions, who you fall in love with, how you make a decision to stay in that relationship, what job you took, or whatever that might be. Just think about it as it relates to your own life. So we'll just close our eyes, and I'll slowly go through these 6 different ways of knowing. And we'll start with emotion. You might become aware of a particular emotion you're having in this moment. How do you experience emotion? And then as you think about in your own life, can you point to a decision that you made, whatever it might have been, that the primary way of knowing what to do came from an emotional response? And visualize that experience in as great of detail as you can, to really re-experience what happened in that moment when you responded in that way because of an emotion. And in this particular practice, as you conjure up this past experience with emotion, also see if in this moment you can align with or drop into that greater way of knowing that is beyond our conscious experience. The Rigpa, pure awareness that exists and is the ground of knowing, moment by moment. And next, moving on to the way of knowing through language, and how language informs the way we think we know in a particular moment. You can think back on some experience that involved language of someone saying something to you, or you saying something to yourself that caused you to think you knew what was happening in the moment through the language that was being used. And once again, see if you can also experiment with that more infinite way of pure awareness knowing in this moment. And moving through to number 3, memory. How memory has been a way of knowing that informed a particular decision. And now moving on to what you've had faith in your life, and how that has informed you, your thoughts, your speech, and your actions. Sort of holding the consciousness of aware of where you have used faith as the way of knowing, but at the same time, dropping into aligning with pure awareness when you are aware of not only what you've had faith in, but also the pure awareness of knowing in this moment. And for the last two, I'll just say choose either imagination or intuition as a way of knowing and bringing to mind a decision that you made based on that way of knowing. Choose one and then explore this distinction between the limitations of consciousness with imagination and intuition, and also pure awareness, a knowing that is the essence of the universe. So I know that that's a lot to process in a short amount of time, but I'll send my talking points to you if it's of any benefit. As always, take or toss, whatever works for you. So we'll end, as always, by sharing the bodhicitta dedication. We have this opportunity to wish that whatever benefit came from us being here together, that it be for the benefit of all beings, that we would wish for all beings to be happy and free of suffering. May the pure, brilliant sun of bodhicitta dawn in each and every heart and mind, dispelling the darkness of suffering and confusion unstoppably until all are illumined and awakened. May the pure, brilliant sun of bodhicitta dawn in each and every heart and mind, dispelling the darkness of suffering and confusion unstoppably until all are illumined and awakened. May the pure, brilliant sun of bodhicitta dawn in each and every heart and mind, dispelling the darkness of suffering and confusion unstoppably until all are illumined and awakened. Body, speech, and mind in perfect oneness. I'm sending you all radiant light and love that is available beyond time zones, beyond countries, beyond the universe. It is all. You are always in my heart. Thank you for letting me share this time with you. If anybody would like to have any comments or questions, feel free to hang out and do so. And I'll look forward to hearing how things go on that particular day for you that you listen to this recording. Be well.